Oh, hi! Are you an amateur photographer looking to do something new with your selfies or portraits, or a beginner Milky Way photographer and you're wanting to try something new with your foregrounds? Maybe you've seen a picture online with somebody standing in a field in the middle of the night holding a big white orb while the Milky Way hangs high overhead. Well, that's what we're going to do today. I'm Walt, this is Delta Astrophotography, and we're going to take a Milky Way selfie. Astrophotography selfies or portraits can be a little more technical than your average selfie or portrait, mainly because you got to illuminate yourself at like 2 o'clock in the morning in a field, and you have to know how to photograph the Milky Way as well, and you take your foreground and your background separately and combine them. So in this video, I'm going to take you through my process step by step on how to take a photograph of the Milky Way and how to illuminate yourself or your subject with the glowing white orb in the middle of the night, and then process your Milky Way photo in Photoshop, and then combine your foreground and your background. I'll try to include chapters, so if you just want to skip to a certain part you want to know how to do, you can go ahead and do that. Let's get started by talking about the gear we're going to use. The first thing we're going to need is this rotten banana?
Yummy nanners, yay!
No way, guys, that's wrong video.
Sorry.
The first thing we're really going to need is a DSLR camera, a wide-angle lens, and a tripod. Wide-angle lenses are absolutely essential because we're going to be doing long exposures, and the more zoomed in you are, the more your stars will trail during your long exposures. So we need something between 14 and 24 millimeters. This is the Canon T5i. It's an entry-level Canon camera. It's actually a pretty old one at this point. And this is the kit 18 to 55 millimeter lens. This is a really good entry-level Milky Way setup. Of course, it doesn't really matter what brand of camera you use, but the most important part is the wide-angle lens. My personal Milky Way camera and lens is a Canon 6D. It's got a bigger sensor than the T5i and a Tamron 24 to 70. So at 24 millimeters, this is an excellent Milky Way lens, and it's also good for travel as well. Now, another piece of equipment we're going to use is an intervalometer. What this does is we plug it into our camera, and it acts like a remote, and it can set a self-timer for as long as we want, so we have a long time to run away from the camera and get into position. But the most important thing it does is we can set a sequence of photos. We can tell our camera to take like 30 photos back to back to back to back without us ever having to touch the camera. And when you're doing Milky Way photos, you never want to touch the camera, not when you're doing long exposures. Now, the intervalometer is not necessary. You can just get away with taking one shot of the Milky Way and using that. But what I like to do is take multiple shots back to back and stacking them in a free software called Sequitur. But that basically cleans up all the noise and adds more detail. The more photos you stack, the more detail you get. It's a pretty simple process, and I'll show you how to do it in this video. For the more advanced astrophotographers, or for those who are into spending more money, you could use something called a star tracker, and this will rotate your camera with the stars so you could take even longer exposures. Without a star tracker, we're going to be limited, only able to take about 10 to 20-second exposures before the stars start to trail. This will rotate the camera with the stars, so we can take much longer exposures, up to 3 minutes, more maybe. I won't be going into how to use a star tracker in this video. I've got other videos about it, and so do lots of other people. Basically, we're going to try to keep it as simple as possible for this video, but this can definitely be done with a star tracker. And finally, we'll need one of these detachable swivel camera flashes, sometimes called a speed light, and a diffuser. This diffuser right here came with this flash. It'll just soften the light a little bit. You need a flash where you can hit a button and it flashes without it being connected to the camera, so you can just manually trigger your flash yourself. Now, this particular flash, it's dead. It doesn't work anymore. But I managed to find my dad's old flash that he got in the early 90s. So it still swivels, at least up and down. I'm gonna have it pointed straight up, and the diffuser I'm gonna use is this right here. This is called a Gary Fong light sphere. You don't have to have this, but it makes the light go in a circular motion around me. This is what it looks like when I got it on there. I can just hit this button. I've got me a little portable flash. This will be the orb. You can hold it straight up in the air. You can hold it between two people and do it like this. There's all kinds of things we'll be able to do with this, and it's gonna illuminate our foreground and us. Now let's move on to how to actually photograph the Milky Way core. And for that, I'm going to turn you over to Steve on the other end of the shed. Well, thanks, Walt. The first thing you folks are going to want to do when photographing the Milky Way core is check your calendars, because the Milky Way is only out between spring and fall. Around March, it's rising around 3 or 4 in the morning, and in October, it's setting around the same time that the sun sets, and you won't be able to see it very much anymore. You can use an app like Stellarium to see when and where the Milky Way is going to be. And for us in the northern hemisphere, it's typically in the south. Also, don't forget to check your moon phase calendars, because you don't want to get to where you're going and a big bright moon washes out all your photos. Never forget, the moon is the astrophotographer's worst enemy. Always check your moon phase calendars. Now we're going to talk about light pollution and location. I'm going to send you over to Bob.
You need to get out of the city. You need to go somewhere very, very dark. Well, actually, it doesn't have to be too incredibly dark. A rural location will be just fine. You can go to a place just outside of a rural town. But the darker, the better, so we can take you. Seriously, I suggest looking at a light pollution map. I will leave one in the description below. And look for the cooler color areas, the blues and the greens and the grays. And try to avoid areas that are red and orange and white. Light pollution is even a worse enemy for astrophotographers than the moon. It's my enemy as well. Okay, back to you, Walt, with camera settings.
All right, for the camera settings, the first thing you're going to want to do is turn your camera's dial to M for manual mode. We're going to want everything to be controlled fully manually. So if your lens has autofocus, turn that off. If your lens has auto stabilization, turn that off. Now each camera is different, so I can't explain to you how to do things on your camera. You might have to look that up. But basically, all cameras at least have the same features. So you can kind of follow along no matter what camera you have. So we're gonna go into our camera's main menu, and if you have anything like long exposure noise reduction, turn it off. Now we'll start with one of our main settings, and this is how the camera saves its files. We're gonna change it from JPEG to RAW if it's not at RAW already. RAW photos are uncompressed files, and we can work with them and do more things with them in post-processing. For our white balance, since we're shooting outside, I usually switch it to daylight, but auto white balance seems to work fine as well. For our first of the main 3 camera settings, ISO, aperture, and shutter speed, we're gonna go with ISO, and if you've gotten yourself into a very dark location, we're gonna start with ISO 3200. Now, if there's a good bit of light pollution around, you might have to come down. Or if you're in a very dark location, you might be able to come up to 6400. Next, for the aperture, we're gonna wanna set it to the lowest f number possible. On my Tamron lens, it's f2.8. On a kit lens, it might be just a little higher, but that's fine, just the lowest number you can go. And finally, shutter speed. And if you've seen other Milky Way tutorials, you can know that this can be very tricky. How long can you expose before you see star trails? And there's lots of math equations out there on how to do that, and I even have some in some of my older Milky Way tutorials. But instead of telling you all the math, we're just gonna make it simple and say, start with 10 seconds. If you don't see star trails, go longer. Maybe you can go up to 15, 20 seconds. Now this is assuming you're using a lens between 14 and let's say 24 millimeters. Basically, you just take a good close look at your test shots of the stars in your test shots, and if they seem round, you can try to expose a little longer. If they seem like they're trailing, then you expose a little shorter. 10 seconds is a good starting point in my opinion. Now, if you're using a star tracker, you can bring that ISO down to about 800. You can stop your aperture down to maybe f4 point something, and you can use a shutter speed of 3 minutes, which you might have to use a remote to bring it as high as 3 minutes. But that's kind of the great advantage of star trackers. You can bring that ISO down, and that makes your photo a lot less noisy, and you have more of a dynamic range, and you don't have stars blowing out, and you get more colors and things like that. Also, you can stop your aperture down. You can set it to a higher number so your stars will be sharper, and there'll be less problems and distortions and things with the stars as well. Before we go outside and shoot the Milky Way, it's usually best to go out during the day and scout out your location. It's best to know where the Milky Way is going to be. For me right now, it's in the south, southeast. And that way you won't be wasting precious dark hours trying to find a spot. You can get right to shooting when the sun goes down. I've already found my location. It's about a mile down from the house. We're about to go out there, and let's just pretend it's nighttime. I can't actually bring my video equipment out there. I don't own any of this land, but a lot of the farmers around here know me. They know what I do. They're cool with it. And I think being outside in the field at 2 or 3 in the morning on somebody's land with a bunch of really bright video lights is going to attract some unwanted attention. We'll have big trucks pulling up with guys with guns going, "What the hell you doing out here, boy?" And we don't want any of that. So we're going to go out here kind of right around sunset. And I'm going to show you how to shoot everything. So the first thing we want to do when we get set up in the field is aim our camera at a brightly lit star and set our camera settings very bright and then manually focus on it. So we're going to go into our camera settings and go to a shutter speed of 30 seconds, stop our aperture down to the lowest number possible, and go to a very high ISO. Next, we're going to turn our camera into live view mode and see the star we're pointing at and turn the focus wheel until it's as small of a pinpoint as possible. When it's there, it'll be totally in focus. Next, we'll set our camera settings for our selfie foreground. We're going to do a shutter speed of about 15 seconds, change the aperture to f4.0, and bring our ISO down a good bit. I think 800 would be good for this. One cool feature my Canon 6D has is if I hit the info button twice, it pulls up this nice handy little level, and this helps me level out my camera, and it won't be crooked because leveling out a camera in the pitch black darkness is almost impossible. When the level line is green, we're good to go. Now we're going to set the self timer on the intervalometer to 30 seconds. That'll give us 30 seconds to get into position. And on the camera itself, we're also going to set the self timer to this 10-second self timer. So that gives us a total of 40 seconds to get into position. Now we just hit go on the intervalometer, and we have 30 seconds to get into position before the camera's 10-second self timer starts beeping. I know when I hear the beeping that I have 10 seconds to get into my pose. So I'm going to sit here and just listen for the camera to start to beep. There it goes. Now I have about 10 seconds to get into my pose. Once the camera stops beeping, I know it's now imaging. I'm going to count to 10 and hit the trigger button on the flash. And there we go. If we did it correctly, and we actually did it at night, the photo should come out looking something a bit like this. Now it's time to take the Milky Way photos. I'm going to aim my camera a little bit higher. I want mostly sky for the Milky Way because it makes blending my foreground and background a lot easier. I want about this much sky. Now let's set our camera settings back to the Milky Way settings we discussed earlier. I'm going to do an ISO of 3200, aperture of f2.8, which is the lowest my camera can go, and we're going to stay at 15 seconds for my shutter speed. We're going to set the intervalometer to 15-second exposures as well, 3-second interval between each shot, and we're going to take about 60 photographs. I think that would be a good number for this session. We're going to hit start and it'll be rolling. After all our Milky Way images are done, I'm going to come back to the camera, put the lens cap back on, and take a series of frames called dark frames. It's essentially photographs of noise that we use in our stacking process to get rid of more noise. Camera settings stay exactly the same, and we're only going to take about 20 photographs of dark frames. Okay, now it's time for post-processing. First thing we're going to do is we're going to stack our images in a free Windows program called Sequitur, or is it Sequator? I never know. After we've got it stacked, we're going to do a little bit of editing in Photoshop to try to make the Milky Way really stand out. Then we'll edit our foreground selfie a little bit, and then we'll combine the two. The data I'm using on this project is something I took about a month ago. I might not have taken the photos exactly like I explained them earlier in the video, but that's not going to make a difference at all to this entire tutorial. Okay, let's dive in. Quick interruption from the future. When I was editing this video, I noticed some of the Photoshop techniques seemed a little advanced, and I feel your pain. Photoshop is really intimidating. It can be very challenging. I'm not a graphic designer. I didn't go to school for photography or anything. I'm still figuring all this stuff out too. But it's just something that you just take your time with, watch the video tutorials slow and rewind them, watch them over and over again. It will eventually click. And there's just so much valuable information out there about Photoshop. Just take your time with it, try to enjoy it, and let's get back to editing. Okay, here we are in Sequitur. First thing we're going to do is we're going to add our star images, our Milky Way pictures. Here they are. Just going to click one, hold shift, and click the last. All right, and it kind of chose one in the middle as the base image. Now we're going to add our dark frames. They call them noise frames here, so I'm just going to click on this. Dark. I'm going to add my dark frames. Now we need to choose where to save our final image. I'm going to click Output. I'm just going to create a new folder. Milk Selfie for YouTube. We'll save it in there. All right, now we're going to come down over here, and there's not much to do down here. Just going to click Composition, Align Stars, and click Select Best Pixels, and slide the slider all the way over to Strict, and then we hit Start, and that's the end of it. I've actually already stacked these in the past, so I'm not going to hit Start right now and do it again. But basically, it's just going to align all these images here and stack them very neatly. Now, if you have a Milky Way photo with a foreground and you want to stack it and you don't want it to mess up the foreground, let me show you how to do that real quick. Okay, I'm going to select some images with a foreground. Same as earlier, we'll add our noise frames in, our dark frames if we have them. This time, when we click Composition Align Stars, instead of selecting Select Best Pixels, we're going to click Freeze Ground. Now we need to tell it where the sky is. So we go to Sky Region Full Area, we'll click that right there. Make sure Irregular Mask is checked, and we'll just paint in the sky. We don't have to be perfect down here towards the ground. It's pretty good at figuring things out. Obviously, this would be a lot more difficult if you had a very complex foreground. But there you go. Now it knows where the sky is, it knows where the ground is, and when it stacks, it'll leave the ground alone. We would just hit Start from here and it would stack for us. Okay, here we are. Here's our stacked Milky Way image. As you can see, it's pretty clean. If we just look around, there's hardly any noise in this photograph. It looks great. The first thing we're going to do is duplicate this image so we can work from a copy. So I'm going to hit Control J. That's Command J on a Mac. Now let's brighten it up. I'm going to hit Control M, Command M on a Mac. Now this brought up curves, and I'm just going to take this right here and pull up. See, it's brightening everything a good bit. You never want to pull and see a straight line. If you see a straight line, you're clipping data, you're blowing something out. Like even right here, we're probably blowing some stars out, blowing some things out around here. Straight lines are bad, so let's just kind of keep it down about like that. I could also pull the darks down and make kind of an S curve to darken the sky a little bit, but the way I like doing that, let's hit OK first, is hit Control L. And this brings up levels, and this is how I like darkening things. Just take this slider over here on the left and drag it towards the data spike, and that darkens the dark areas. Gives us more contrast. I'm going to hit OK. Now we're going to create a new layer, and from now on when we create new layers, we do it by hitting Control, Alt, Shift, and E together. That's Command, Option, Shift, and E on a Mac. This basically takes everything we're working on and just mixes it down and puts it as a new layer on top. I know we could just duplicate layers, but if you start to use layer masks and things like that, this command works a lot better. So we're just going to go with Control, Alt, Shift, and E each time we create a new layer. Now, as we can see, this photo looks very orange. It's very warm. So we're going to cool it down and do a few more adjustments as well. We're going to go to the top, Filter, Camera Raw Filter. And the way I go about cooling it down is just take our temperature, just dial it back a bit. We don't want it real blue. It's not very natural. Just kind of a cooler color. That looks a lot more natural to me. There's a good bit of light pollution down here at the bottom, and it's kind of warm compared to everything else. And we can kind of try to correct that a little bit by coming up here, right here, where it says Graduated Filter. Let's click that. And make sure all these are set to their default positions. So I'm going to click right here, Reset Local Correction Settings. Okay, now we'll just go down here and drag up our mask here, or our filter, kind of over where we see some of that light pollution right down here, and just turn the temperature down a touch. There, that kind of evened things out a bit. I'm gonna hit OK. Let's hit Control, Alt, Shift, and E again to create a new layer. Command, Option, Shift, and E on a Mac. The next thing I'm gonna do is increase the vibrance in the Milky Way only, not everywhere else. So let me show you how to do that real quick. We're gonna go up to Filter, Camera Raw Filter again. And I'm just gonna bring the vibrance up a little bit. And the saturation just a touch. And you can see we're affecting the entire image, but I'm gonna show you how to make it only affect the Milky Way. So let's hit OK, now that we've turned our vibrance and saturation up a bit. And we're gonna come down here and click this right here. This is gonna create a layer mask. And right now it's white, but we're gonna hit Control I or Command I on a Mac. Now we can no longer see that vibrance adjustment anymore. And we will come over here and make sure our brush is white. If not, we can change it here, but it needs to be white. Select our brush, and now we'll paint in where we wanted that vibrance adjustment to be. Make sure your opacity up here at the top is pretty low. Got mine set to 42%. You can change your bracket, your brush size with your bracket keys. I'm just gonna kind of click inside the Milky Way a little bit. You can see that vibrance adjustment I did earlier is just coming out where I click. I'm just increasing the vibrance in the Milky Way core only. Now I'm not just painting. I'm just kind of clicking. Okay, now that we're done with that, we need to go to Filter, Blur, and Gaussian Blur. Let's zoom out so we can see. We just need to make sure that all that painting in we did is kind of blurred a little bit, so there won't be any hard edges. It'll look natural. And I think that's fine right there. We're gonna hit OK. Let's create a new layer. Control, Alt, Shift, and E. Another thing we can do to this image is dodge and burn. It'll be over here in your menu on the left. This is the burn tool, and if you right click, this is the dodge tool. It could look like either one, like this little lollipop here, or this hand. So we'll start with dodge. Dodge, wherever I click, it's going to lighten the lighter areas of where I click. We're going to be lightening these kind of brighter areas inside the Milky Way core. I want my exposure down pretty low. I got it set to 19% right now, and its range is on midtones. I'm just going to click in the brighter areas of the Milky Way. I'm going to try to make this as subtle as we can. Okay, we don't want to go too crazy with this. And I'm going to right click this over here and select burn. We're going to do the same thing. Make sure ranges, shadows, and exposure's down pretty low. I have it at 16% right now. I might even go down to 12. Now I'm going to click on the dark, dusty areas, and it's going to bring that out. See, it's really showing off that dust now. Okay, I'm liking the way that's looking. There's just a few more adjustments to make. This is not going to be a full Milky Way tutorial, just kind of some basic stuff. All right, let's create a new layer. Control, Alt, Shift, and E. We're going to shrink some of these stars down a little bit. Let's go to the top to Select, Color Range, and in our drop-down menu, we're going to select Highlights. Bring our fuzziness up and our range down. We don't want it all blown out like that or anything, but we want to have a lot of stars selected. All right, now we got a bunch of stars selected. Zoom in. You can see they're selected, but the selection is right on the edge of the star, and we want it to be a little on the outside of the star. So we're gonna go Select, Modify, Expand, and we're gonna expand it by 2 pixels. See, there we go, that's what we're looking for. And Select, Modify, Feather, just so it'll be a smooth transition. Now I'm going to hide these marching ants by hitting Control H, Command H on a Mac. And let's go to Filter, Other, Minimum. Preserve roundness. We don't want squareness, we want roundness. And our radius, we're just going to do half a pixel, 0.5. And hit OK. Let's look at before and after. Before, tons of stars. After, very few, and you really see all the dustiness of the Milky Way here now. If that star reduction was a little too much, we can always just change our opacity, bring a few back. I'm going to go at about 75%. Control, Alt, Shift, and E for a new layer. This is going to be the final adjustment for now. I'm just going to go to Filter, Camera Raw Filter. I'm going to bring the contrast up and the exposure up just a touch. The blacks down a little bit just to make the sky darker. We'll do more adjustments once we get the two photos blended, so let's just stop here for now. Let's look at our before and after to see what we've done. This is what we started with. This is what we've ended up with so far. All right, let's make sure we save it. We're gonna need to save it to be able to use it as our background later. So I'm gonna go to File, Save as Copy. I'm gonna call it Milk Background for YouTube. Uncheck layers. We don't need to save all these layers over here. And save it. Now let's open up our foreground shot. I'm gonna go ahead and close this. All right, here's one of our foreground shots. I'm just gonna click Open here in Camera Raw Filter. All right, just like we did with the Milky Way background, I'm gonna hit Control J to create a new layer. Let's go up to Camera Raw Filter. Up here, Filter, Camera Raw Filter. Turn the exposure up just a bit. Actually, let's turn it up a good bit. You can actually see the Milky Way background right there. It was just starting to rise when I took this picture. But anyway, let's turn it up just a touch. Turn the highlights down so my flash doesn't get too blown out. See if we need to make any temperature adjustments. There we go. Let's bring up the shadows. Take shadows and bring them up. And we're gonna do another graduated filter. Let's go to up here, right here, graduated filter. Make sure this is reset right here. Drag this up. I'm gonna bring the shadows up a little more. I'm just trying to see the ground a little bit better. See that grass. Exposure up just a touch. And let's do a little noise reduction down there. Okay, that should be enough. Hit OK. Now is probably the moment you've been waiting for this whole time. We are going to blend in our Milky Way background. I'm going to create a new layer by hitting Control, Alt, Shift, and E. Now we're going to go up to Edit and down to Sky Replacement. Yeah, it's that easy. Go to this. Oh my God. It automatically chooses a sky for you. We're going to go up here, this little drop-down menu, and click the Add button, and we'll find our own background. Click it, hit open. Now put it down in our menu here. I'm going to hit that. All right. Let's do a little bit of adjusting. Turn the brightness down on my background sky just a touch. I'm going to shift the edge just a little bit. There we go. All right, we're gonna hit OK. Now, if we wanna move the sky around a little bit, we need to go over here, turn our sky brightness off for a second, and click on the sky layer right there. Make sure our Move tool is selected, and we can move the sky around a little bit and just kind of readjust the Milky Way where we want it to be. I want it about right there. We can turn our sky brightness layer back on. Click on that sky replacement group up here at the top, and let's hit Control, Alt, Shift, and E to create a new layer. Now we're just going to do some overall adjustments to the entire image. Filter, Camera Raw Filter. Bring up the overall brightness. and more contrast. Let's turn the clarity up a good bit and some dehaze. There we go. Now I'm liking it. Maybe just a touch of vibrance and saturation. Let's see what happens when I turn the blacks down. I still want it to be a little more contrasty. Yeah. Yeah. No, we don't want to go crazy. That looks terrible. Now let's come down to detail and do a little noise reduction. Turn up the color noise reduction slider a good bit, and then just the regular noise reduction as well. Cleans everything up just a little bit. Yeah. Doesn't look half bad. Looks pretty clean. Doing one last look at this, and the only thing I can think of is, for me personally, it might be a little bright. Might bring that exposure back down a touch. Maybe not. Let's hit OK. And there we go. All right, that's how you take a Milky Way selfie. Thanks so much for watching, and if you enjoyed it, let me know in the comments, give me a like. And if you like this kind of stuff, please subscribe. I'm going to the Grand Canyon this weekend, and I'm hoping to get some Milky Way photography done there as well, and I'm going to try to make a video about that. And next weekend, I believe, maybe on the 15th of May, we're going to have a full lunar eclipse. Here's a photograph I took of the last lunar eclipse back in November or December. It was a partial lunar eclipse. So I'm going to make a video about that, how I did it, and how you can photograph the May 15th total lunar eclipse. So stay tuned for that. All right, as always, everybody, stay spacey, clear skies, and good night.